As a brand new parent, you want to give your newborn the absolute best start to life. But what many parents don't realize is that even a normal birth process can put tremendous physical stress on your baby's delicate body, specifically the brainstem, the neck, and their nervous system. This is a common conversation that I have when someone hears that we take care of kids at Thrive, especially newborns and really little ones. They wonder, why would a newborn need adjusted? Why might a kid need that? And really the short answer is birth, right? This can take place in any sort of birth experience, this sort of damage and stress, but it is especially true when there's a C-section, when there's forceps or vacuum extraction, or any sort of extra intervention done to help get baby out of the birth canal. That birth injury causes so many common newborn challenges: crying all the time, nursing and latching problems, sleep struggles, reflux, colic, constipation. Those are just some of the ones that we frequently see. In conventional medicine, they really don't help with this, right? They might write them off as just normal baby symptoms, or they might say that they'll eventually grow out of it, which is the worst advice. I hate that. But what we really understand is when you know what's going on behind the scenes, these are big indicators that there's some sort of stress or dysfunction going on in your baby, and you don't need to just wait. You need to address it before it turns into worse problems down the road. So whether you're expecting parents wanting to avoid some of these problems, or maybe you have a little one right now in the thick of the storm and dealing with stress, this video is for you. I want to explain how are those things connected and what can pediatric chiropractic do for your child. So let's start with just realizing how common of an issue this is. There was a group of osteopathic physicians that did a study examining newborns, and this was healthy newborns, not ones that were struggling. And what they found is that 99 out of 100, 99% of these kids were dealing with some sort of what they called KISS, somatic imbalance, or kinematic imbalance with suboccipital strain, some sort of subluxation, some sort of stress in the nervous system. Hugely common, but still ignored by traditional medicine, really because they don't have a lot of action steps, right? There's not a whole lot of ways that they can address that through medication or through some sort of pill, and so it is completely missed. And then that is turning into so many future problems down the road that we'll explain here in a second. And why is it that birth is so impactful? Well, the part of birth that is most vulnerable to injury is the part that is the most important. That is the upper neck, that is the brainstem. And parents, you all know this, even if you don't have any sort of background in anatomy and physiology, because when you're passing off a newborn to a family member, to a friend, and they don't really know how to handle babies, what are you telling them? You're saying, hey, careful with the head, protect the neck. We know that they can't hold up their head and neck yet, but we somehow forget that during the birth process, and we use that really delicate head and neck and upper cervical spine as a lever, right? Babies coming out of the birth canal often are held here and pulled, turned, and twisting. There's an immense amount of stress done in that really, really delicate area. Not only is it fragile, but this area up top, that is the key neurological center for so many functions. That is the brainstem, the cerebellum, all of the key vagus nerve regulation functions are all coming in from this top of the neck area. So it really is the air traffic control center. And that very top of the neck controls the tone of the whole nervous system, and it controls a lot of motor tone challenges. So early on, that physical misalignment and fixation, that might show up as more of motor problems, right? That's going to be latching problems, head rotation, something like torticollis, maybe even flat spots that are going to develop from that, right? That is the early signs that we'll say is you'll see that physical imbalance. But then that physical imbalance, that physical restriction is going to lead to mobility challenges as well. There's going to be a lack of motion, what's called fixation, right? Misalignment and fixation, those two components. And that fixation is when we start messing up the neurological feedback loops, right? Our brain needs to have input. Our brain needs to have specifically proprioceptive, which is sensory input all the time. And the majority of that input is coming from those mechanoreceptors, or those sensors that are in your spine and in your central nervous system, specifically this area, right? Because as you grow up and as you're an adult, how you can hold your eyes level with the horizon is incredibly important for just walking on 2 feet, right? To be able to balance and to have that complex neurological demand, you've got to have a whole lot of sensors going on behind the scenes up top. So when that area is damaged and when there's extra injury there, it is not only creating physical challenges that you can see, right? The latching, the head rotation issues, it's creating major neurological stress into the nervous system, right? It's sending alarm bells and SOS signals into your central nervous system, which then creates a stress response that creates this fight or flight survival mode instinct in their nervous system. And it shifts them away from what they should be, which is rest, relaxation, digestion, and overall wellness. that side of your nervous system, what's called the parasympathetic tone, or what we refer to as the brake pedal, right? Gas pedal, brake pedal. That brake pedal, that factors in here as well, because the area that runs the majority of those brake pedal functions is the vagus nerve. Your vagus nerve comes from that same area, right? Well, we just had baby Sophia up here. It's a cranial nerve. It comes out of the base of your skull, runs right by those first couple cervical vertebrae. So when we have that upper neck injury and damage, the vagus nerve is also being affected. And now we have this crazy imbalance where there's extra stress response, there's extra fight or flight triggered in their body, while the brake pedal, the calming rest and relaxation side of the nervous system, is being shut down because that vagus nerve is being negatively impacted. So you can hopefully start to see that this birth process is incredibly impactful for kids, both in those early phases, but as we grow as well. So absolutely, if you've got a kid dealing with this in the moment, in the thick of it, as a newborn, that is exhausting, right? As a parent, you are just drained when you have constant late nights, when they're up a lot, they're not sleeping well, and especially when they're fussy, right? It's one thing to have a baby that's awake and content, right? You nurse them, you feed them, they go back to sleep. Yes, it's tiring, but that's how baby life works. When they're inconsolable, when they're crying and screaming, and you just know in your gut that there's something going on and you can't help them, that is where it is really, really crushing and really concerning, both for mom and for baby. So not only as a newborn, but this is going to affect the lifespan. And that's where it's on our whiteboard here on the bottom, but let me get you a little closer here. What we can see with this chart here is that every single area of neurological development, we have both sensory pathways, vision, hearing, language, and then even higher level cognitive function. When you could zoom in here, you'll see that this chunk here, that pink shaded area, that first 12 months of life, the peak of neurological connections, which would be synapses, the peak of how many brain cells are connecting happens in that first year, right? Even things we don't think of until way, way later in life, right? Like emotional regulation, focus, all of those abilities, it shows up here, right? So how we have that first 12 months of life, that first year of life, and some of them, even the first 3 to 6 months, that is incredibly important for lifelong neurological adaptability and lifelong wellness for our kids. So that's why we see that this isn't something that they just grow out of, right? Sure, the newborn isn't colicky and refluxy forever, but then it turns into the kid with ear infections, and then motor and speech delays, and then sensory challenges and anxiety and ADHD and all sort of other struggles as they get into a school age and older. So let's not ignore this. Let's undo it, right? Probably the last couple questions you have is like, okay, that makes sense, but how the heck do you adjust a newborn, right? How is that going to work when you're picturing maybe what an adult adjustment looks like, right? Maybe hands-on, forceful, manual adjustments, popping and releasing sounds. That is not at all what adjusting a newborn baby is like, right? There's nothing more than a gentle, sustained hold, right? We might be palpating and analyzing what's going on, and then there's just a slight pressure, a slight hold, maybe a little impulse that's going on into that delicate area to make that correction. A lot of times if babies are chilling, snoozing, they just sleep right through the adjustment. It is no big deal at all. So parents, whether you are in the thick of these struggles or you are trying to avoid them, let us help. Let Pediatric Chiropractic be a part of that journey. All of our neurological scans that we do for every patient, we do those scans for newborns as well. We have a thermal scan that's measuring where within the nervous system are those primary stresses. And then we have one that's called HRV. Heart rate variability is measuring, are they stuck in fight or flight? Is their nervous system in a survival mode, or are we adapting and handling stress well? Those tests let us put together a game plan so that we can get them out of that, both the in-the-moment problems and create that future long-term health so that these challenges, right, that the higher level brain function things that show up later on aren't a part of your kid's story. Send us a message if you have questions on that. Please reach out if you want to schedule that for your kid. I cannot wait to meet you soon and help your family thrive.